It was just another Saturday for James, who, as usual, was standing before the grave of his deceased wife. However, something disturbed him. Other flowers were appearing at the site, left by someone unknown. Determined to solve this mystery, James was about to uncover the truth when someone approached and said, "Do not come back here anymore." Hello, my friends, I am Linda, and this is Linda's Love Stories. I hope you enjoy this story. James adjusted his shirt for the 10th time while looking at his reflection in the bedroom mirror. His tired eyes and the wrinkles around them told a story of pain and guilt he had carried for 3 long years. He took a deep breath, grabbed the car keys, and left the house, ready for another routine Saturday. The drive to the flower shop was familiar, every turn and traffic light etched in his memory. Upon arriving, the doorbell announced his entrance, and there was Danielle, as always, gently smiling behind the counter. "Good morning, James," she greeted, her warm tone contrasting with the melancholy he carried. "The same as always," James nodded, a small, forced smile on his lips. "Yes, please, the white roses." While Danielle prepared the bouquet, James observed the shop. The aroma of fresh flowers filled the air, bringing a momentary peace. The walls were decorated with photographs of elaborate arrangements, probably Danielle's work. He always admired her talent with flowers. "Here it is," Danielle said, handing him the carefully wrapped bouquet. "I hope you have a good day, James." He thanked her and left, feeling Danielle's gaze on his back. She always wondered about the story behind that man. So devoted and so sad. The cemetery wasn't far away. James parked the car and walked among the tombstones, his heart heavy with each step. Reaching Alice's grave, he knelt down, placing the fresh flowers. "Hi, Alice," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "Another Saturday here with you." James stayed there, lost in thoughts and memories. The day was sunny, but for him, it always seemed cloudy. Hours passed, and when he finally stood up, his joints ached from the time spent sitting on the cold ground. The following week, the scene repeated itself. James entered the flower shop, but this time, something in his expression made Danielle hesitate. "James, is everything okay?" she asked, worry evident in her voice. He paused, considering the question. Today marks exactly 3 years," he said, his voice almost a whisper. Danielle rounded the counter, approaching him. "I'm sorry, James. It must be a tough day for you." "Yes, it is," he replied, feeling the weight of the words. "Sometimes I wonder if it will ever get easier." "You can't blame yourself for what happened," Danielle said softly. James looked at her, surprised by the insight. "But I do have a share of the blame," he admitted. Danielle guided him to an armchair positioned in the corner of the shop, offering him a coffee. "Do you want to talk about it?" she asked gently. James hesitated for a moment, but feeling the need to vent, he began to recount. "When I received a job offer for a year-long project abroad, Alice begged me to refuse, asked me to stay and fight for our marriage, which was going through a difficult time. I thought that time apart might be what we needed to breathe, to find each other again after some time away. But on the night before I left, Alice told me with tears in her eyes that, for her, this was the end." He stopped, the pain clear on his face, and continued in a low voice. "She said that by accepting that proposal, I was choosing work over our marriage. I thought I was doing what was best for both of us, for our future. I thought a year away would do us good." James clenched his hands, feeling the guilt deeply rooted. That year was worse than I imagined. Communication became increasingly difficult. The calls were short, and her words grew colder. She was distant, and I tried to convince myself that it was just the distance talking, that when I came back, everything would be fine. He paused to breathe, the pain of reliving it weighing on his voice. On the day I was to return, she called me. She said she would pick me up at the airport, that we needed to talk. I think she wanted to reconcile, that everything would go back to normal. But she never made it. The accident happened before she could find me. Danielle listened attentively, her heart aching for the pain she saw in James's eyes. "You couldn't have known, James," she said softly. "Accidents happen. It wasn't your fault." James shook his head, as if the guilt still weighed on him. "She was coming to meet me. I should never have left. I should have put our marriage first." Silence hung between them for a few moments. Finally, Danielle spoke. "You loved her, James, and she knew that. I'm sure she wouldn't want to see you torturing yourself like this." James looked at Danielle, seeing compassion in her eyes. For the first time in a long while, he felt a small spark of something different from guilt, perhaps gratitude, perhaps even a slight warmth. In the following weeks, James's visits to the flower shop took on a new tone. He started to arrive a little earlier, bringing coffee for Danielle. Their conversations extended beyond flowers, talking about everyday life and the small joys of life. Danielle noticed the subtle change in James. His eyes seemed a little less heavy, his smile a bit more genuine. She found herself eagerly anticipating these Saturday moments, although she tried not to harbor any hopes. After all, James still carried a load of grief and pain. It was evident that something was growing between them, a subtle connection that strengthened with each meeting. However, every time hope arose, James suppressed it. He wrestled with the overwhelming feeling that moving on, or even allowing himself to feel something for another person, was a betrayal of Alice's memory. How could he love again when he still bore grief in his chest? Danielle, for her part, felt the invisible tension that lingered between them. She knew James was still stuck in the past, and the last thing she wanted was to force him to cross a bridge that he perhaps wasn't ready to cross. Her affection for him was deep, but she respected the time he needed. Danielle did not speak about her own feelings, fearing it would pressure James or, worse yet, drive him away. One day, after a long conversation about books and the small joys of life, James fell silent. Suddenly, his eyes met Danielle's, and for a brief moment, she thought he would say something they both anticipated. But then he looked away, clasping his hands on the table. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to move on," he confessed quietly. Danielle smiled gently, trying to hide her own pain. "I understand, James. There's no rush. Grief has its own time." One Saturday, James arrived at the flower shop looking especially thoughtful. "Danielle," he began hesitantly, "have you ever wondered why we choose certain flowers for specific occasions?" She smiled, appreciating the genuine interest. "Actually, there's a whole language of flowers. Each one has its own meaning." James listened, fascinated, as Danielle explained the meanings behind different flowers. Roses for love, lilies for purity, chrysanthemums for honesty. Time flew by, and when James looked at the clock, he realized he was late for his visit to the cemetery. "Sorry I made you late," he said, a little embarrassed. Danielle shook her head. "Don't worry. It was a pleasure talking." As James headed to the cemetery, he reflected on how his visits to the flower shop had become a bright spot in his week. Danielle brought a light that he hadn't realized had been missing from his life for a long time. Arriving at Alice's grave, James noticed something different. There were fresh flowers there, but they were not the ones he had brought the previous week. Intrigued, he wondered who else might be visiting Alice regularly. In the following weeks, James began to pay more attention. There were always fresh flowers on the grave, in addition to the ones he brought. He assumed they were from Alice's mother, although he found it strange that he had never met her there. One day, determined to solve the mystery, James arrived at the cemetery earlier than usual. From a distance, he saw a male figure leaving flowers on Alice's grave. Intrigued and a little apprehensive, he approached. "Excuse me," James called out, making the man turn around. "Are you the one who always leaves flowers here?" The man, with a gentle appearance and tired eyes, nodded. "Yes, it's me. My name is Arthur." "Who are you?" James asked, confusion evident in his voice. "How did you know Alice?" Arthur hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath. "James, there is something you need to know." James's heart raced. "What do you mean?" "Alice and we were friends, but it wasn't an ordinary friendship," Arthur explained softly. "We fell in love." James felt as if the ground had disappeared from under his feet. "What? But how? When?" Arthur placed a comforting hand on James's shoulder. "It was during the year you were away. Alice was struggling a lot with the end of the marriage, with a lack of communication. We met by chance and became friends. Over time, the feelings grew." James staggered, sitting down on a nearby bench. Arthur sat next to him, giving him space to process. "But we never," James stammered. Arthur continued, "Alice respected you and your marriage very much. She knew she needed to settle things with you first." "Then why was she going to pick me up at the airport that day?" James asked, his voice trembling. Arthur sighed. "She wanted to talk to you in person. Alice had decided to ask for a divorce. She thought you deserved to hear it from her face to face." The words hit James like a punch. All these years, he had imagined Alice was going to reconcile with him. The reality was completely different. "Why are you telling me this now?" James asked, feeling lost. Arthur looked at him with compassion. "Because you need to know the truth, James. You need to free yourself from this guilt you're carrying. Alice had moved on, and she would want you to do the same." James remained silent for a long time, trying to absorb everything. Finally, he looked at Arthur. "Thank you for telling me. It must have been hard for you, too." Arthur nodded. "It was, but Alice always spoke well of you. She wanted you to be happy, James." The two men remained there, strangely connected. When Arthur got up to leave, he turned to James one last time. "Don't come back here, James. You need to know that Alice wouldn't want to see you tied to the past. She wanted you to live, to be happy." James watched Arthur walk away, feeling a mix of emotions he couldn't name. He stayed there for hours, replaying every moment of the past 3 years, seeing them in a new light. When he finally got up, the sun was already setting. James looked at Alice's grave one last time. "Goodbye, Alice," he whispered. "Thank you for everything." On the following Saturday, James entered Danielle's flower shop. She greeted him with a warm smile, already heading towards the white roses. "Actually," James gently interrupted her, "today I would like something different." Danielle looked at him, surprised. "Sure, what would you like?" James smiled, a genuine smile that lit up his eyes. "How about a colorful bouquet, something that represents a new beginning?" Danielle felt her heart race. "I have exactly what you need," she said, moving to create a vibrant and lively arrangement. When she finished, James took the bouquet and handed it to her. "Danielle," he said, a little nervous, "would you like to have dinner with me tonight?" Danielle's face lit up with a radiant smile. "I would love to." As they left the flower shop together, James felt a weight lift from his shoulders. For the first time in 3 years, he was looking to the future, not the past. If you enjoyed this, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment with a number from 1 to 5 to let us know how much you liked the story. Also, watch the video that is currently on your screen. See you soon.